What's going on, people? So, Johnny Barthold here. Today we're going to be doing a UFC 219 breakdown with predictions from yours truly, and also what I'm also going to try to do today is I'm going to give you guys 3 fights to watch for each fighter that I go over today. So I'm not going to be going over the entire card because I kind of just want to give you guys the stuff to be excited about, and there's maybe a few fights on this card that aren't going to be that exciting. So I'm just going to kind of dig into the meat and potatoes of what's going on in the main card as far as the top 3 fights that I see that are going to be fun and entertaining and get you guys to watch. So without further ado, let's get into it. First fight I wanted to go over is Carlos Condit versus Neil Magny. I think this will be an interesting fight. I've got Condit winning this one by way of stoppage or unanimous decision. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. The one thing I will say about Magny is, although I'd put my money on Condit, Magny is awkward. He kind of has like a Keith Jardine thing about him, even though he's much more fluid and much more athletic than Keith Jardine. He has kind of an awkward, weird style, and he's tall for the weight class, and it makes it hard for guys to kind of find their range on him and get inside on him and do a lot of damage. The exception to that, I think Hector Lombard lit him up a few times in the first round when they fought, and then Magny hung on and ended up submitting him late in the fight in the third round after Lombard gassed himself. But long story short, Magny is a difficult guy to fill out, difficult for guys to really get off on. Too many clean shots. Carlos Condit is very technical, a very sound striker. He's probably going to want to move around a little bit, play on the outside, mixing some kicks, kind of what I'm expecting. But if Magny plays that awkward style and he can stay out of range of a lot of Condit's attack, I think it'll be interesting to see how that first round plays out. I definitely think there's going to be a filling out process probably for the first 2-3 minutes. I don't think Condit's going to go balls to the wall because Magny is a scrappy guy. He's probably going to fill him out. So Magny could steal the first round. There's a possibility he could steal the third round because he gets stronger typically as the fight progresses. So that'll be interesting to see as well. If Magny can win that first round, I think that's going to be a tough one to call. But if Condit comes out, fills him out for a little bit, and starts pot-shotting him, hitting him with some solid leg kicks, some body kicks, I think Condit will definitely have him figured out by the second round. And if he can hold on and his gas tank is up to par, I think he can take the third round as well. So I've got Condit winning that first fight, probably by unanimous decision. Might stop him if the old Condit shows up, because I don't know. I feel like Magny at some point he's going to get caught just with he's not the best defensive fighter. It's just kind of his awkwardness that makes him difficult to hit. So 3 fights to watch for each fighter in that bout. For Carlos Condit, I have his fight versus Robbie Lawler. It was for the welterweight title. It was an absolute dogfight, one of the best fights of all time. It was fantastic. So if you're wanting to see the violence that Carlos Condit brings into the ring, Robbie Lawler fight is the fight for you. Carlos Condit versus Rory MacDonald also was a very brutal but technical fight, and that would be a great fight to watch. And then finally I have Condit versus Nick Diaz. And the reason that's not the most exciting fight, but the reason I put that one on there is because that was a 5-round fight, and it kind of shows more of the technical aspect of Condit. Nick Diaz is arguably the best boxer in MMA. Condit knew that, stayed on the outside, kicked and moved, had a very solid, tight kickboxing game plan against Nick Diaz, and it was pretty spectacular to watch considering what Nick Diaz typically does to people that he pressures. Condit was able to avoid it for 5 rounds and kind of just picked him apart from the outside. So Condit gives you kind of a little bit of both worlds. He's extremely violent. He can have absolute dogfights like his fights with Lawler and MacDonald, and he is also very technical, and he can bring that to the cage as well like he did against Nick Diaz. For Neil Magny, the 3 fights I have, if you want to get excited about this fight, I would go back and watch Neil Magny versus Hector Lombard. I kind of mentioned it earlier, but Hector Lombard was really lighting him up for the first round, first couple rounds really. It looked like the fight was going to get stopped on a number of occasions. Neil Magny hung in there, and as I mentioned earlier, as the fight progressed, he got stronger, and Hector Lombard is known to gas, so by that third round, Neil Magny was kind of just picking him apart and ended up getting him in a submission, I believe. Second fight for Magny to watch, I would go back and watch the Kelvin Gastelum fight, which I did go back and watch this one. It's an interesting fight. Gastelum looked a little sucked down at 170. He didn't look the same. He didn't look like the killer he usually does, especially the way he's looked at 185. But it kind of just goes to show you a little bit more about Magny, kind of that awkward style I was telling you, because Gastelum is an animal, and he couldn't really get his hands on Magny, and he couldn't really enforce his game plan like he typically does. Third fight, Neil Magny versus Johnny Hendricks. What's up, Hazel? Neil Magny versus Johnny Hendricks, and that's a good fight. Again, kind of similar situation to the Gastelum fight. Hendricks looked tired, he looked gassed, he didn't look that good. I don't think it was a great fight for Magny, but again, kind of highlights his awkward movement style that was giving Hendricks trouble, and that could pose some trouble to Carlos Condit. So that'll be interesting to see. Again, my pick for that, Carlos Condit, he's the favorite. 165, I think, is where the lines have him right now. So it'll be interesting to see. But Magny, again, if he steals that first round I think is going to be very telling in that fight. If Magny can secure that first round, I think he's got a good shot at winning the third round, especially with Condit's long layoff that he's been in since, I think it's an injury, or he's just been out for a while. So it'll be interesting to see. Second fight I wanted to go over, and this is probably the one that I'm most excited about, is the Edson Barboza versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. So if you don't know about these guys, then I don't know why you're watching this video, but Edson Barboza is probably the best technical striker in 155. He's an absolute animal. He avoids wrestling at all costs. Very rarely do you ever see him hit the ground, and if he does hit the ground, his goal is to get up as soon as possible. And on the other side of the coin, Khabib is, in my opinion, without a doubt, the best grappler. Maybe Demian Maia would have something to say about that, but Khabib is probably the best MMA grappler in the UFC, in the world. I mean, the guy's an animal, 24-0, undefeated, which is unheard of, especially in the toughest weight class in the UFC, and the guy's a killer. So for this one, I've got Khabib, obviously, by unanimous decision. It's only a 3-round fight, so I think Barboza is extremely durable, extremely tough. I think it'll be tough for Khabib to put him away, but he will more than likely get his hands on him, take him to the mat, and pound on him for 3 rounds like he did pretty much every fight that we've seen Khabib in. So for Barboza, to get you guys ready for this fight, the 3 that I recommend to watch, number 1, Edson Barboza versus Tony Ferguson. Barboza did not win that fight, but it's an amazing fight to watch, and it also shows his durability and toughness. Him and Ferguson were in an absolute war while it lasted. Barboza got off some huge shots, hurt Ferguson, looked like he was going to finish him. Ferguson, one of the toughest dudes in the game, comes back, ends up submitting him. I don't know if I should tell you that, I just spoiled it, but it's a fantastic fight. So if you're on the fence, again, about ordering this event, this fight alone, and then the fights that you can watch leading up to the fights tomorrow, should be enough to persuade you. Second fight for Barboza versus Terry Etim. Terry Etim, we haven't seen him in a while, but he was a super promising young prospect coming up from England. Great striker. That was an exciting fight, and Edson Barboza hits him with probably the most devastating wheel kick you'll ever see. Definitely in the UFC. I don't think there's ever been a wheel kick quite like that. Looked like he killed him. So it was pretty gnarly, but a great fight to watch. And then the third fight I have for Edson Barboza is versus Anthony Pettis. And that's just kind of solidified Edson Barboza as the best striker. Anthony Pettis is a little bit of an unorthodox striker. He was savage on the feet. Edson Barboza absolutely took him to school. So that was interesting to see. For Khabib, the 3 fights I have recommendations that I have for you guys to watch is Khabib versus Michael Johnson, which was his last fight, which pretty much earned him a number 1 contender fight with Tony Ferguson before Conor left to go box Mayweather. So Khabib versus Michael Johnson, it's an absolute dominating performance. Michael Johnson is a very high-level wrestler, and Khabib makes him look like a child. So I would definitely go back, watch that one, and pretty much every Khabib fight looks the same. So the second fight I have on here is Khabib versus Rafael dos Anjos. The reason I picked that one is because you get to see what he did to dos Anjos, who went on to become the 155-pound champion, and now he is arguably the number 1 contender at welterweight. So dos Anjos is no joke, and if you go back and you watch what Khabib does to him, it should get you pretty pumped for this one, because Khabib's the real deal. And if there's anybody who is a nightmare matchup for Conor McGregor, it's got to be Khabib. Third fight, Khabib versus Abel Trujillo. Reason I picked that one is because Khabib breaks the single fight record for most takedowns in a UFC bout. I think it was 21 or 24 takedowns that he secures against Abel Trujillo. Trujillo is also an animal. He's a beast. He was able to get up. He wasn't pinned down as much by Khabib as a lot of the other fighters that we've seen. Hence why Khabib had to take him down, or Khabib had to take him down 20 plus times. So that's super interesting to watch. So for Barboza versus Tony Ferguson, Barboza versus Terry Etim, that's E-T-I-M for Etim, and then Edson Barboza versus Anthony Pettis. For Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Michael Johnson, Khabib versus Rafael dos Anjos, and Khabib versus Abel Trujillo. So those 6 fights right there, if you guys go back and watch them, if that doesn't get you excited to watch this fight, then you're not a real fan. And then finally to the main event. So main event is Chris Cyborg, who is a cyborg freak of nature, killing machine, versus Holm, who is a very technically proficient 18-time world champion in boxing. This one should be interesting. So my pick here is Cyborg, and my pick for Khabib Barboza was Khabib. I think I mentioned that, but we'll just be sure. So for the main event, I've got Cyborg over Holm. Cyborg is a significant favorite in this one at 360. So I think the lines are about right for that. Reason is that if Cyborg decides to stand with Holm, Holm could obviously pose some threats. Cyborg is a come-forward fighter. She's a berserker, basically, and Holm is a very technical counter-striker. So it'll be interesting to see how Cyborg handles it, because the big advantage for Cyborg comes on the ground. Cyborg is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, high-level black belt. She trains with Gabby Garcia, who is arguably the greatest female grappler in the world, and that's her main grappling partner. And supposedly, from all the information I've gathered, Cyborg gives her everything she can handle in training, and it's a very competitive rolling session every time that they get it on. So it'll be interesting to see if Cyborg decides to take her chances on the feet, where Holm could legitimately catch her with a punch, maybe hurt her, maybe put her in some danger, or if she just decides, screw it, I'm going to take her to the mat, where Holm has been dominated before by the likes of Miesha Tate. And if you've seen Cyborg, or if you've seen her fight, which I'll give you recommendations for, you will know that Cyborg is not the same as Miesha Tate, and completely different. And if Miesha Tate can dominate Holm on the ground, I can only imagine what Cyborg will do to her. So, fights to watch for Cyborg if you guys have not seen her fight. First one I would recommend is versus Gina Carano. Number one is that was one of the biggest women's fight at the time. It was probably the biggest women's fight. Gina Carano was a Muay Thai world champion. Her father, I forgot his first name, and I'm a Cowboy fan. Carano. Look it up on Wikipedia. But Gina Carano was a stud, world Muay Thai champion. And Cyborg absolutely wrecked her, absolutely destroyed her, which kind of built to her whole mystique and kind of got her where she's at. Cyborg versus Tonya Evinger, which was Cyborg's last fight in the UFC. And the reason I chose this one is it's not the funnest fight to watch if you're going to watch a Cyborg fight, but it showed a different side of Cyborg. She was much more technical, much more patient. She stayed on the outside. She didn't go berserker style. She picked her apart, and she pretty much just tagged her up for a few rounds. So it was a little bit different side of Cyborg. She was a little bit more reserved, a little bit more technical, and that was good to see. And that type of Cyborg mixed in with a little bit more of a berserker style is a nightmare for every woman in that division. And then the third fight for Cyborg is Lina Lansberg. Again, that probably wasn't the best fight. If you're going to watch Cyborg, her earlier stuff is a lot more violent, but that was Cyborg's first fight in the UFC, and for some reason, I always like to watch more recent fights than later fights. Even though they might be funner, it gives you or more fun, it gives you a better outlook to where the fighters are at currently. So for Miss Holm, the fights I have for her to watch for you guys to kind of catch up on where everybody's at. For Holm, I have Holm versus Ronda Rousey. That was a huge one. You've probably seen the highlights if you watch MMA at all. Holm ended her pretty much everything about Ronda Rousey. Her mystique, everything was gone with the massive head kick. Beat the hell out of her. It was pretty brutal. It really was the first fight that exposed Ronda Rousey and her lack of striking prowess. And then for the second fight for Holm, I have her versus Bethe Correia, something like that. Not a great fight for Holm, kind of boring, but she does end it in pretty spectacular fashion, so I recommend you guys watching that one. Maybe skip through the first round. I think it was the second round TKO, KO. But again, it kind of gives you her skill set. If somebody's not pressing the action, she's not a very exciting fighter. Luckily for us, Cyborg will more than likely press the action. Probably throwing a couple combos, a couple low kicks, working a takedown. That's kind of what I'm expecting. It might not be the most exciting fight, but it's going to be interesting to watch. Cyborg and Holm, that is. So, Holm versus Bethe Correia, it's worth a watch. You get to see a pretty spectacular highlight finish by Holm. And then the third fight I have is Holm versus Miesha Tate. Now, this one I chose because Holm did not win the fight, but she dominated the fight for about 4 rounds. So she was dominating the fight. You can maybe skip through the first couple rounds, but the end of this fight is pretty telling because Miesha late in the 4th round is able to drag her to the floor and she's able to dominate her on the ground. So it kind of gives you a little bit of insight as to possibly her weaknesses as well, which is helpful to get the full picture of how this fight's going to turn out. So it'll be interesting to see. Miesha kind of exposes a lot in Holm's game, and that could play a huge factor. So that's pretty much all I wanted to go over today with you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope this 3 fights to watch for each fighter we cover is kind of cool and maybe something different. I wish sometimes earlier on when I was a UFC fan. First of all, if you don't have the UFC Fight Pass, it's $10 a month. If you're ever going to watch UFC, it's worth it. I go back and watch these fights all the time just for fun. It's just a good thing to do. But I'm going to give you guys 3 fights for each fighter that we go over, that we cover to watch, and I think it's beneficial. I think it's helpful. I wish that I would have had that earlier on in the sport so that I wasn't having to watch 30-second clips on YouTube to try to figure out who the hell these fighters were and any fights that were worth shit. So I'm giving you guys the cheat sheet. Those are the fights. I'm probably going to go ahead and put those in the description as well so that you guys can have that because I think it's helpful. I think it's kind of cool. I'll pat myself on the back. Good job, Johnny. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hang loose, guys. Hang loose. Jiu-jitsu on.